Molly Hunker and Greg Corso are co-captains of Sports, a design and research collaborative formed in 2010 and currently based in Syracuse, New York. Molly was raised in Wyoming and received a Bachelor of Arts from Dartmouth College and a Master of Architecture from UCLA. In 2014, she was awarded the inaugural Douglas Garofalo Fellowship from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and she is currently an assistant professor at Syracuse University School of Architecture. Greg was born and raised in California and received his Bachelor of Arts and Master of Architecture from UCLA. He is a McDowell Colony Fellow and is currently assistant professor at Syracuse University School of Architecture. Sports has received numerous awards. Most recently, in 2016, they won the Adrian Smith Prize for the Ragdale Ring competition, where they constructed the Project Rounds, which is also awarded a Best of Design award from the Architect's newspaper. And their recent project, Runaway, won the Museum of Contemporary Art Santa Barbara Take Part Make Art Pavilion competition and is installed as a traveling urban installation, moving to sites in various neighborhoods around Santa Barbara. Their work has an intensity which is formally engaged and seriously playful, and reinforced by conflating the knowledge sets latent in craft and the aesthetic category of cute, with the expertise and procedures of high tech and bespoke. Please welcome Molly and Greg of Sports.
Thanks, Erin. First we'd like to thank the ARC League, like our colleagues, for this really great honor. It's really terrific to be here, especially among these other winners who've been really terrific to get to know better this week. And we greatly appreciate everyone involved in the prize and the exhibition, so thank you all very much. We'd also like to thank our families who are here tonight, which is really special for us. So when considering the topic of this year's theme for our prize submission, we were thinking of support as an ideological proposition, so where one champions or cheers for a specific type of solution, a legacy, or a kind of camp of thought, much like one supports a particular team. However, sometimes that kind of support runs parallel to the uncritical, rooting for something out of tradition or status quo when it no longer possesses the merits to be rooted on.
So the work and research of our studio, in a way, intends to reject the inertia of support in favor of a more malleable form of operating. Rather than supporting a particular team, we are compelled by smart plays, clever game plans, and the sort of edge or boundaries of the rules, however those are explored, similar to these gentlemen at the All-Star game. And given this, our projects have been preoccupied with an elasticity of the built environment and the various ways in which the ordinary and the extraordinary intersect. For us, the flickering between these states encourages multiplicity, novelty, and discovery, and potentially new forms of engagement. How does the world of objects, sites, images, and behaviors alternate between the functional and infrastructural on one hand, and the awkward and the poetic on the other? And by leveraging a breadth of cultural and physical conditions, the projects we'll show tonight hope to discover discrete but other uses of space, material, and site. And so for the exhibition and in the gallery and tonight's lecture, we selected 3 projects that demonstrate these ideas and consider how the assets of the built environment may be repositioned or re-examined in a multitude of ways.
So the possibility of flickering between different states of understanding or legibility within a specific context, so let's say like familiar and unfamiliar, became a really interesting investigation for this first project we'll show, which is an installation we developed for a gallery on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. So the context here is super interesting and super charged because of the heavy significance of the ground plane. So this ground is clearly a constructed one, both literally constructed as a piece of infrastructure upon which people walk, but also territorially constructed as a collection of mini sites that each have a specific reference and value. So this ground performs in a variety of different ways. So we see the ground implicated explicitly as a cultural spectacle and social magnet, but also as a site of remembrance or symbol of significance, and even further as a site of protest or activism. So the intention with our project was to leverage the significance of this ground plane, the value and interest and literal attention of the Walk of Fame, and extend it into the gallery, but tweaking it a little bit into something new and unfamiliar in that process. So there's a contextual and material friction that is instigated by coupling the spectacular quality of Hollywood with a foreign to that particular context sense of the ordinary, in this case through material. So at the gallery threshold, the ground material shifts from charcoal terrazzo, which is the material of the Walk of Fame, to an ordinary and ubiquitous in Southern California terracotta tile, which was rejected stock from a local tile manufacturer due to nearly invisible imperfections in the clay surface.
And by deploying the tile on a kind of unfamiliar floor surface form, what materializes here is a visual and experiential environment of which the spectacular quality of the Walk of Fame and Hollywood Boulevard meets the familiarity of the domestic palette. So you can see here the recrafting of the ground plane and how it starts to introduce more spatial qualities and a new atmosphere to the gallery. Our intention was to make the floor look as ordinary as possible, while bit by bit defamiliarizing it through the incremental lifting of the tiles, and generating the effect of the ground beginning to hover and become three-dimensional. And to further degree embedded within the new ground plane, there's a compelling contrast between the imperfect and mundane material and the digital and controlled topography of the surface. In terms of construction, the project uses acrylic rods to elevate the tiles from the gallery floor, which have the quality of diffusing light along the undersides of the tile surface. The resulting landscape generates an atmospheric quality and an artificial presence within the gallery and also back into the street. Even with all the tourists coming to the Walk of Fame during the day, the sidewalk in front of the gallery may actually see more pedestrian traffic at night than during the day. And it was important for us for the project's audience was just as much the drunk club goers at night as it was the designers who might visit the gallery during the day. So at night, the project performs at the scale of the neighborhood when it glows, kind of re-engaging with the neon and brightness and that type of fabric of Hollywood Boulevard, becoming an extension of that context.
So we've recently had the opportunity to work on a few slightly larger scaled projects, and in them we've had this opportunity to couple a more rigorous exploration of the qualities of this installation, so ideas of material and form, with a more complex notion of function, use, and behavior. So architecture can, of course, reinforce common uses of behavior and common uses or behaviors and be made increasingly efficient to host those specific uses. In turn, an alternate behavior can transgress architectural function such that the varied relationships between form and function, between space and activity, has the power to challenge our understanding of what is a normal use of a space or object. It's interesting to think about how we might misuse or hack the understood functionality of a common object like a chair in order to produce something new or different or unfamiliar. So though this particular essay by Bruno Munari is making a functionalist argument, the images also bring up an idea of sort of misuse or misbehavior as something that celebrates the creativity or play of the user. So for instance, stairs and railings in the urban environment are constantly misused by skateboarders, so much so that this architectural or urban form has become a normalized form in designed skate parks, despite the fact that these new environments have no use for the original function of the formal element. So the urban form that had a specific purpose is appropriated into a new setting for a completely different use, which sets up a new normalized condition of misbehavior or counter behavior. So we might understand these ideas of misuse as being one way in which design can kind of make familiar things strange. And another way, of course, is defamiliarization of form and or aesthetic, like this piece of furniture by Jürgen Bay-Verdrug, which asks us to rethink what these objects are, how we engage with them, and how in turn that redefines their use.
And our project for the Ragdale Foundation blends these approaches together and looks at a specific form that is tied directly to specific ideas of function, yet no right way to use it. There is a weird elevated usefulness in the project that emerges out of an unspecified function, a kind of precise ambiguity or specific vagueness. And the features within the overall form were specifically designed to the scale of the human body and the variety of ways in which a body can engage with the surface. The project is a performance pavilion that learns from the history of theaters in the round, which historically bring the performers into the same space as the audience, allowing for a more dynamic and blurrier relationship between stage and seating and between performer and viewer. The project is round in plan and therefore has no front, back, or side. Through its multiplicity of surface undulation types, sizes, and lack of specific hierarchy, the project encourages a variety of performance types, performer-to-audience relationships, stage arrangements, and seating organizations. Small-scale undulations in the ring surface act as seating for viewers during performances or artists to contemplate work during the non-performance times. Mid-scale undulations in the surface provide entrances to the inner space of the ring while also providing a small space for protected stage areas. And the largest undulation is potentially designed as the main stage area and a stage that can be broken down into smaller parts and distributed around the ring for several concurrent performances.
So depending on how the performance is staged and organized, which was done by a set of guest curators over the course of the summer, the formal articulations of the project take on a different implied use. So for instance, when a performance is sited on the main stage, as you see here, the low parts of the ring are implied seating, while the mid-scale undulations are implied entrances to the inner space of the ring. When another type of performance takes place, these identities shift, destabilizing the quote-unquote function. So those sitting, laying, and napping were some of the ways in which we anticipated audience members and resident artists engaging with the ring over the course of the summer. We were really interested to see how the performers would further engage with the surface, not misusing in this case because their project has no clearly defined use, but activating maybe a broader understanding of use or a kind of in-between understanding of use. So Jessica Cornish, who you see here, was a fellow at Ragdale shortly after the project was completed, and over the course of the summer, she utilized the project in a series of performances. This is an excerpt from one such performance in which she engages with the project in, let's say, an unusual and less obvious way than the average visitor might, which for us realizes certain programmatic potentials for the project.
And the physical nature of her engagement hints at an interest in the tactile quality of the surface. And so we wanted to find a conventional finishing material that could perform in a unique way in service of the playful vocabulary of the project. So by using a version of rubberized stucco, we took a seemingly rigid and routine building material look and generated both a tactile and visual softness to the project. So the continuous and grippy qualities that come from that help to reinforce the overall goals, programmatic goals of being able to wander, explore, and inhabit all areas of the project. Similarly, we looked at degrees of contrast and playfulness in how objects sit in a natural landscape, whether that as a serious and legible architectural construct or as a playful and witty proposition. So the color choice, which was called Mint Parfait, was intended to create a sort of low contrast relationship between the pavilion and the vegetation in the context, but also reinforce the kind of lighthearted character and nature of the project. And so it became something that was both distanced itself from the site, but at the same time kind of blending in with it.
And in further considering how an architectural project can kind of flicker between those states, so the kind of blending in into a particular context and also vibrantly asserting itself sort of against it. We recently developed a pavilion for the Museum of Contemporary Art Santa Barbara. And what was interesting to us about this region is the air of Santa Barbara, much like the rest of Southern California. It's super visible, so caused by heat and beach fog, it sort of changes the way that buildings and other objects in the urban fabric and the landscape look by erasing their edges. So here we were interested in envisioning a pavilion as a collection of objects whose physicality could be blurred into the air of the sort of context, while also sort of popping out from it.
And we tested this representation of blurriness and this haziness through a series of elevational drawings that we were developing while we were developing the geometries and the relationships of the actual architectural objects. We tested the line weights, thickness, and angle and overlap to create drawings that at once held the object's edge, but at the same time sort of blurred it. And so to establish a material strategy that operated like these drawings, we knew we needed to develop a porous volume where the blur and registration of that geometry was produced by constructing them from many elements. So the project is made out of thousands of brightly colored steel rods that develop this saturated haze individually and even further in overlap with one another. So just as in the drawings, we were interested in the effect that at once reinforced and dissolved the geometries of the individual pieces, destabilizing the solidity and clarity of a single shape in favor instead of this kind of haze. The project in part is an initiative for the Museum of Contemporary Art and will be installed in a variety of different locations over this current year. And it's intended to host a number of community arts events and serve as a visual landmark for this initiative. And as much as we were interested in this aesthetic quality of the project and its surroundings with each new location, we were also interested in how it could instigate new relationships or new activities given the change in orientation and context.
So back to Munari for a second. So a chair on its side, for instance, loses the exact use that it had when it was oriented in its original fashion, but perhaps it has developed new or unfamiliar uses and effects. And beyond the change of use suggested by such a clear orientation shift like that, we also considered ideas of flexible use or cross-programming, like in this coffee table skirt by Hussein Chalayan. Here there's an embedded alternate use just waiting to be activated in such a case as one suddenly needs a new garment when lounging in the living room. Though in a different way than Munari's chair, this too suggests new use through alternate orientation. So the multiple objects of the pavilion, of which there are 3, each have simple, self-similar geometries and have a number of different possible orientations. So in some orientations, the object can act as a dappled shade structure, while in other orientations, it could act as something akin to a wall, a bench, a loungescape, or a performance stage. Due to the fact that the pavilion is not a single thing, but rather made of multiple pieces, the organizational principles that relate to the collection are also critical to the understood use, as ambiguous as the use may be. So furniture layouts of the architectural interior from the 19th century have been great examples for us for the kind of varied relationships of the collection. So how the configuration of chairs, sofas, tables, rugs, lamps, etc. define specific rooms, style of those rooms, and their use. Program and function of the space then is understood as being defined by the local conditions produced by the collection of objects, organization, and arrangement within the space. And in fact, there have been hundreds of books and magazines published over the last century that offer advice about how best to arrange these elements for a particular end goal. So to cut the length of a narrow, long room, like you see here, or any number of other socio-spatial desires. And at a smaller scale, we can see some of the same characteristics in the object collections of Charles and Ray Eames. Though perhaps not overtly useful, the Eames use the term functional decoration to describe these carefully composed collections of disparate objects, the aesthetic being one of addition, juxtaposition, and composition.
Susan Stewart in her book On Longing argues that the collection is not constructed by its elements, rather it comes to exist by means of its principles of organization. So by combining the idea of shifting orientations and of individual artifacts with the changing organization and arrangements of the collection, our pavilion develops a renewed spatial and visual identity and different use in each new site of which it moves to. Ultimately acting as a sort of urban exhibition as a whole, the project is intended to decorate the various landscapes of Santa Barbara in new ways and as a new icon in each new site. So this is the first site, which is the Santa Barbara Pier, and the context is kind of touristic and heavily embedded with kind of commercial and spectacle. The next site is Estero Park, which was a residential neighborhood near the university, and this is its current site, which is Ellings Park, and here it's kind of a natural landscape and recreation area for different users. So as the project shifts from site to site and the orientations change, their associated uses are different, their display is different, their visual experience of the material overlap is different, and it brings a temporary and unique identity to the different neighborhoods as it moves. So through this quality, we can understand the pavilion's role as a collection of cultural infrastructure, a spectacle that temporarily offers a new space and a new aesthetic in an existing neighborhood for a variety of new and unfamiliar urban activities and visual experiences. And it's been really interesting to see that play out through social media. So these are just a few of the kind of Instagram images that highlight some of the activity of the pavilion, that the pavilion is either instigated or kind of served as a backdrop for. So selfies, yoga, games, date night, and a variety of other activities.
And the spectacle of the objects themselves is heightened also by the fact that the project is sort of popping around the city from site to site about once a month. So this is what the project looks like in transit through Santa Barbara, and then being craned into the site. So the fact that this is continuously happening actually plays a really important role in the presence of the project in the city and how it engages with the various communities. So in order to capture that quality of spectacle of the pavilion, and also to be true to the conceptual origin of architecturalizing the Santa Barbara air, we actually hired a photographer whose expertise is wildlife and landscape photography. So we were super interested to see how someone whose attention was already honed to, for example, the way fog appears and disappears along a mountain ridge or something, might actually see the pavilion differently than the typical architectural photographer. So maybe he would actually see it as a kind of air rather than as an architectural object. Since the project is temporary, as are the others that we've shown today, these representations will be the only lasting artifact. So rather than simply to document, for us it's interesting to try and produce these sort of final representations that actually continue to push the notions of sort of flickering between multiple states of understanding that we've spoken about today. Thank you.